Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us. And assuming that either you weren't at the bar at the hotel last night or you're bolder than the others. So I appreciate you joining us at 9:30 in the morning on Saturday. My name is Erin Miller, and I'm the co-founder and CEO of Discourse Media, which is a small independent newsroom of 8 people in Vancouver, Canada. And we're here today to talk about multi-newsroom collaborations. And I think the Panama Papers has given us an awesome opportunity to demonstrate what we mean by this. And what I really mean is projects that we're able to pursue as journalists that pursue a more ambitious impact or investigation than we would be able to do as a single journalist or a single media outlet. And so we're going to speak today a little bit about that, and we're going to offer a couple examples of the sort of work that we've done in that space, and also broaden the idea of partnership a little bit broader than that, to think about not only what can we do if we collaborate between journalists, but what can we do to reallocate expertise and resources when we're collaborating with other assets like communities and experts. So that's my little introduction there, and I'm going to hand it first to Anne-Lise from Journalism++, who is going to speak a little bit about some amazing work that she's done, and then we'll hear from Andrew Divigal, who can give us a little bit of perspective from now at the University of Oregon. So he's both a participant and an observer of the media industry, so can give us a little bit more perspective and broaden our view about that. So I'll hand it over to Anne-Lise. Yes. And if we can have the slide up, please. Perfect, thank you. Go ahead, Anne.
You want me to start to present the project?
Yes, please.
Okay. So hello. So yes, I'm project manager at Journalism++. So it's an agency for data-driven stories. And as we are here to talk about collaborative project, I will briefly introduce you a project that we did 2 years ago called the Migrant Files. So this project, we started this project in 2013, and we wanted to, with a group of 10 European journalists, we wanted to assess the impact of the wall built between Greece and Turkey. So this wall was built by Greece in order to prevent migrants and refugees to coming into Europe. And the cost of this construction of this wall was 3 million euros, and we wanted to assess the impact of this wall and to spend that much money, because our guess was that building such a wall will just make the journey more dangerous and will not prevent people to come into Europe, but just lead to more people to die. So to assess the impact of this wall, we just wanted to answer this simple question: is the number of deaths at the border is higher than before the wall? And we couldn't answer the question because it appears that no one knew and no one kept track on how many people died at the border. So no public body or no NGO had the answer. So together with the consortium of journalists, we created the consortium, the Migrant Files, and we decided to create a database and to collect data. So we used already existing database that was but not very good database, but structured, and it was just draft from there to there, and we mostly use information published in the newspaper, and that's why for us collaboration was essential, because we needed to deal with all the different languages of the Mediterranean Sea to build this database.
Great. Can I ask you one follow-up question? So what was Journalism++'s role in that? You mentioned when we were speaking earlier that you think if one media outlet had decided to create this database, this data that just didn't exist otherwise, that it might not have worked because there needed to be an organization just sort of outside. Can you just elaborate a little bit on the role that you took in creating that project?
So how we coordinate the project, you mean?
Pardon me?
You mean how we coordinate the project?
Yes.
Yes. So we had the role of project management in this collaboration. So we had this idea of investigation, and then we decided to apply for a grant, journalism fund. So we contacted other journalists, and we created this consortium. And the thing is that the journalists that we contacted, they worked in the media, so we contacted them to be a partner in doing the research and as well for the publication. And our role at G++ was to coordinate everyone and to do the project management.
Great, thank you. I'll tell you about a couple of my projects now, starting with Power Struggle. So this project, it's actually just launching in a couple of weeks on April 15th. So this is just a mock-up of the website that I'm showing you here. But what this project was it came out of a desire for us in Canada to be reporting in a more nuanced, systemic way on energy access. So we knew that there was 1.3 billion people in the world that don't have reliable access to electricity or no access to electricity, and this is a huge problem from a development perspective. It prevents them from kids from doing their homework and being able to succeed in school. There's health implications. It's a huge development issue. So we knew that was happening, and in the discussion in the last year about climate change as we were approaching the climate talks, COP21 in Paris, we heard this really wasn't part of the dialogue, and we were really interested in understanding why. And this is not only a problem in the developing world, of course, that is where most of the people live, but we also knew that in northern Canada, in a very rich and developed country, there was also issues of energy access in communities where they had to fly in diesel in order to run generators, and it became a huge poverty issue. So we wanted to report on this in a deeper, more systemic way. But it was one of these issues that when we looked at the media coverage that had already been done around it, there was a lot that was really siloed. So looking at through a business lens or through a regional lens or something like that, but there was very little reporting that pulled that all together, those local stories in the context of the global geopolitical politics that were going on and all of these issues, because this is really a global issue when we're talking about trade-offs. So we realized that we wanted to do something that could get at those global systemic issues while also rooting it in the stories of the people who were impacted on the ground by these issues. So Power Struggle was our response to that challenge, and we put together a collaboration between 10 journalists in different countries, all reporting on how energy poverty was impacting their communities, while also looking for some of those trends. So we had 2 reporters in Africa, 2 reporters in Asia, someone working from Eastern Europe, where it's an issue in Romania, someone in Latin America reporting from Brazil and Costa Rica and Mexico, 2 reporters in Canada, and I'm forgetting someone, but there's 10 in total. And then we had 2 reporters dedicated to it at our offices in Vancouver that were looking at this from a global perspective, trying to pull some of the trends that the reporters were unearthing from their local reporting into doing some global trend reporting and also some data journalism around that. So we were creating data interactives that then we could cross-publish across all of these 10 publications. So we're pulling that all together in one combined web platform that will be out on April 15th, and then all of the media outlets, both local outlets like newspaper in Nepal and Cameroon local outlets, while also some larger ones like Al Jazeera as a partner and Thomson Reuters. So we're all being able to exchange this content and hoping that this is contributing to better more solutions-oriented public discourse about this issue. So that's just one example of the sort of work that we do at Discourse Media, and I've got a couple examples of simpler collaborations that I'll save for the discussion, because these big, massive projects are really only one way to take these concepts and try them. But the concept at the center of all the work that we're talking about is this idea that, particularly at a time where there's fewer and fewer resources in traditional media outlets going towards the newsroom and reporting, there still are a lot of resources that we can work with. So by pooling what we're doing and reallocating resources, and I mean that not just money, but platform, expertise, money, reporting resources, whatever those happen to be, we can be doing more ambitious work than we would be able to do alone. So I'll pause there and hand it to Andrew, who's going to offer us some more views on it.
Is it possible to try to be able to control it a little bit or have access to it? Super. So first, apologies if you looked at the print program and expected Amanda Zamora. So clearly, I'm not Amanda Zamora. Yeah. And but I appreciate Aaron's invitation for me to join this conversation. So one of the things that, as a practitioner and also as an educator, you know, I'm really interested in sharing some of the work I've have either observed or help lead, or even as an educator also, you know, analyzed over time. So one piece of collaboration, at least I helped introduce formally. Let me back up a little bit. So I'm Andrew DeVigal. I'm at the University of Oregon School of Journalism, where I'm the chair of Journalism, Innovation, and Civic Engagement at the Agora Journalism Center, which is, again, part of the University of Oregon. And before that, I was actually the multimedia editor at the New York Times for 7 years. So at the very end of my tenure there, I was able to help lead and introduce this potential collaboration with the New York Times OpDocs presentation, as well as National Film Board of Canada. So that introduction to collaborate ended up producing this interactive piece looking at the high-rise of the history of high-rise as well as the impact in the city itself. So what I'm just sharing here is just the output. It's got some really interesting interactives that come with it as you scroll through. One thing I want to highlight in terms of this particular feature was you know, the credit role, right? Even though it was a collaboration between the Times and National Film Board of Canada, it required a slew of a huge team to be able to produce this interactive. Beautifully produced, beautiful presentation, and really some really compelling content. There was also really some great user-submitted content as well, where we allowed readers to also tell their own stories of their experience in high-rise. So in any case, that was a sort of like a way, and I'd love to offer in my perspective of what the successes and challenges were in this level of collaboration. As context too, I think it'd be helpful to highlight a couple of other collaborative projects that I've observed and witnessed that hasn't been discussed yet, at least in the panels I've attended around engagement and around this topic throughout this festival. So I just wanted to add to this conversation and not necessarily repeat some of the collaboration that I've seen that others have already mentioned. One of them that I haven't heard yet is this collaboration called the Detroit Journalism Cooperative. And it's a cooperative of 5 media companies in Detroit, Michigan, in the United States. And it's really looking at the issue of, and a conversation around reporting on the city's future after bankruptcy. So for folks who may not be aware, the city went under bankruptcy several years ago, so it really is this important element right now. How do we bring the city back to life? So because of with the Knight Foundation and also with Renaissance Journalism, they were able to fund this collaboration of 5 media companies. And what's unique about it is that it's both mainstream public media and ethnic news collaborating together to really foster that conversation. So the values of it is to be able to apply multiple perspectives from the community and also reach diverse audiences. So it's just yet another example of some good collaboration work across media organizations. And then the final one that I'll point out is the Northwest News Partnership. So what we've also observed in the last few years was this partnership that was really fostered with the Oregon Public Broadcasting. So of course I know about this project mainly because I live in Portland, Oregon, which is the home of OPB. So again, a really good example of news outlets collaborating together, and OPB served as the catalyst, if you will, for that conversation. To me, in some ways, it was sort of creating the Associated Press across Oregon, right? A news network that valued news content and information that was shared across multiple news outlets. So, from my observations, those are the things that I would love to add to the conversation. And again, I appreciate your invitation. I also appreciate hearing from the folks in the room to get the expertise that you guys might offer, as well as some of the perspectives as the questions come around. So thank you.
Thank you, Andrew. So I'm going to, we'll have some discussion and based on some questions that we prepared, but I'd love to ask for questions from the room without too much more talk from us. But I'll start by just asking you, Andrew, so partnership, and I'm sure, has anybody in this room had any kind of partnership in their work? A show of hands? We got a couple, yeah. Were the partnerships, did anybody in this room have an easy partnership where it just was like everything was smooth and it was great? Yeah, exactly. Partnership is by its nature messy. Media outlets have different agendas, different levels of resources. They're generally, you don't really know clearly what the other partner intends to fully put in until you're there. It's hard to articulate these things and come to a mutual understanding. And so, and they're resource intensive. They take, as you know, Anne-Lise mentioned earlier, they required a lot of project management and coordination from a central group. So my question is, I had to throw back to you two, is what's the case for collaboration? Why would we collaborate in the first place? And particularly, what is the incentive for a newsroom like the New York Times that presumably has more resources than some of the other examples that we spoke about to partner with other organizations?
So first, I think that some projects couldn't have been done without collaboration. So it's like the aim is to have like more ambitious journalism project. For instance, I'm thinking about the Panama Papers, and some journalists, they did the calculation, and they say that it would have taken more than 26 years. It would have been only one single team of journalists to read the document, so not even analyze the document, but only to read it. As I said, in our case, in the migrant files, it was mandatory to have collaboration just because of the languages. We needed to have like different speaking people and language people. And so yes, the first reason is to have more ambitious project, and the second reason and incentive and why media outlet would want to collaborate is to have better quality journalism, because when you work in a collaboration, you share everything, you share the methodology, you share the work, and you share the feedback, and so your work is automatically peer-reviewed. So it's lead to better quality, and better quality I think can lead to better like to increase the level of trust of the public in journalism. I think it's very important.
I mean, I would add to that you know, I think it's the values that you bring together is, again, the idea of being able to offer multiple perspectives, because the more perspectives that we can contribute to that conversation, the fuller story it can become, right? It's always an interesting challenge if it's one one perspective that it's really just from that lens. So the more voices, or at least the more opportunities to view it in multiple ways, then we can capture the whole story. And I think that's been the challenge: is how do we relish or even honor the whole story in these perspectives, and to really perhaps even accept that there are multiple truths to some stories, because it's all based on individual experiences. So if we can honor that, I think that would build trust within the community. It would also build credibility to the report. And then, you know, that's one value to, you know, from a perspective of participating news organizations. The other one is just the wider public, right? Is there an opportunity to bring more diversity and bring together more rural or even more urban communities together to actually have that conversation? So, you know, the example that I shared with the collaboration with the New York Times and National Film Board of Canada, I think it's really bringing in individual expertise that they've had, right? I mean, obviously, it's interesting when you look at the site. It honors both the Times style visually as well as the National Film Board style as well, and I think they did a great job of blending the two. And also, they brought in their expertise. You know, the filmmaker Catherine has been working on this project for many years for NFB, and an opportunity to sort of distribute that on the platform. The New York Times really valued both her work as well as the distribution model for the Times. So there were some multiple values in that perspective.
I'll just add another example from our work to this. If you could just show the slide, please. The cover of Maclean's magazine, which is our news weekly in Canada. And this project was a whole system investigation into why Indigenous population in Canada is so overrepresented in the justice system. And they had a great reporter, Nancy MacDonald, on this, who is an award-winning reporter who had done some really wonderful work around Indigenous issues in the last year. And she began this investigation, and she quickly realized that she was in over her head when it came to the data that was involved in this one. Even though she's one of Canada's top journalists, she realized very quickly that she needed more. And also, on her last couple of major investigations into this issue, she had been somewhat criticized for the way that she was approaching the stories about the Indigenous population. And there's a long history in Canada that I'll spare you guys of mainstream media screwing up the way that we approach stories about our Indigenous history, and not all of that is on Nancy's shoulders, but she took those criticisms very seriously and wanted to find a way to better inform her reporting by the community experiences on the ground of dealing with the justice system. So she came to us at Discourse Media, and Nancy is an old colleague of mine, and asked us to work with her on this. And the reason that, even though Nancy is one of Canada's top journalists and Maclean's is the leading magazine in Canada, they were able to bring us in to do some work because they recognized that they did have a need for further expertise to be in there. And from our perspective, and some of this project was, we raised independent funding for, and some of it was Maclean's funded. So we all brought resources to the table in order to make this work, which I think was an important part of it because we were all really invested in the project. From our perspective, we're a small newsroom that doesn't have our own platform. We publish in partnership. So in order to have our reporting have the impact that we wanted to have, it was very valuable for us to be working with a magazine that we knew could get this issue talked about in the House of Commons. So what we did was we worked with Nancy to try to access data about all the different levels of the justice system, and we found that we were able to access data about everything except for the policing level. So the question that we had, there was a lot of anecdotal stories that Indigenous people were saying that they were being targeted by police in urban centers, and yet every time one of these stories happened, the police just sort of discounted it and said, this is not a problem, there's no racial profiling happening, and there was absolutely no racial data that we could access. We filed Freedom of Information requests with all the police departments in Western Canada, and we got nothing back. So we were able to create a survey and a community-based reporting strategy that involved 1,000 people in contributing to a database about their experiences with police that gave us enough people to understand the impacts of race and different socioeconomic differences on your likelihood to get stopped by police. So we created this data together. We worked in collaboration with a number of university professors who had worked in this area before, particularly looking at incarcerations of Black people in Ontario, so that we made sure that that the data was going to be statistically sound because it was beyond our expertise as well. And the project created the only data that exists in Canada looking into this issue, and has been very impactful and led to lots of discussion and some policy change at the provincial level, and it's being discussed at the federal level at this point. So I think this is a really clear example of why Macleans would want to be involved, why we would want to be involved, and how together, even though we had lots of arguments about exactly how to describe statistics around different things, it was worth that difficult partnership. So yeah, that's just one more example. Another question that I wanted to ask you, Anne-Lise, is just how your experience working with multiple media outlets has, how you've managed that, whether some didn't quite live up to your expectations about their contributions, while others went over, and just like how that impacted the work that they were doing.
So when we initiate a collaborative project, so we went and we come to see the media partners, and we ask them to be partners, and what we offer to them is access to the database, an overview of the project, an overview of the analysis, because when we are doing the project management, we are doing as well the analysis, the global analysis, and then we ask them to choose, they have access to the database, so they can totally choose which angles to it in their publication and what they want to talk about. The thing is, for the migrant file, for instance, it was 10 months investigation. So we asked them to publish, because I did as well to have a common publication date. And we ask them to publish, okay, so in 10 months, it would be great if you can publish this exact day. So some of media and partners, they refuse because they couldn't getting committed to this date, because they say, like, we cannot assure you it will be on the front page this exact date, because no one knows what can happen in the world. I think it should be the opposite. I mean, this date should be fixed, and if something big happens, we should fix another date. But so some media partners, they refuse. Some others, they say yes, but at the end they couldn't be involved a lot. Some others that say yes, why not? At the end they were very involved, and they published a very deep paper, and so it's very different. What we try to do when we are doing the project management, it's not depend too much on the others. That's each media should be like kind of independent, and the global analysis can be made without everyone committed at the same level. So that's why, again, like, project management is very important. Communication, like, always, if one partner change and finally has to work on different subjects, it's very important that have good communication and that everybody knows, and we should find backup plans and everything.
Do you want to add to that?
I think I'm good.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, that's been really our experience as well, what Anne-Lise was describing, whereas the partnerships that are most successful, particularly when we're bringing like multiple media outlets together that may have competing publishing schedules, competing editorial agendas, etc., or may consider themselves competitors themselves, to have sort of a wide net umbrella approach to partnership that allows for different levels of collaboration and different levels of commitment, also with the caveat that generally the more you put in, the more you get out. And I think that was one thing that really came out of the migrant files, was that the people who were more involved in creating that database also created better, deeper stories and understood it better and got more out of the collaboration. So, and that's okay, right? Like you had mentioned, that's fine from your perspective.
Yes.
Yeah.
I guess rather than adding something, I was wondering if I could ask you a question in terms of, and even you, to keep the conversation, is, I guess from my observation and some of the efforts that we've been trying to do is how do you define success for collaboration? And do all stakeholders agree to that definition of success? So, for example, is one layer of success, as we typically have done in this industry, is metrics, right? The traffic, web traffic. Well, that's going to be different based on who's going to be playing and what kind of stakeholders. Or is there a definition of, is there an agreed definition of success by all team members or all stakeholders, so that it's not by web traffic, but rather by reach, or but rather by, you know, the conversation, the quality of conversation that the collaboration is leading towards. Has there been some discussion around that definition of success?
I don't know if we can have like different metrics and different way to measure success. So when it's collaborative investigation, or if it's just the same way we measure success and then investigation, classical investigation. I would say like, yeah, but it's true that with the collaboration you can have a bigger impact, so you can have like bigger goals. Like for instance, again, the Panama Papers, there's investigations that led to like prosecution and
yeah.
things that change.
Yeah.
With the migrant files, at the end, our database, so as I said, no one used, no one collected the data, no one knew about this subject, and at the end, our database is now used by the International Organization of Migration, so which it's like can be a success as well. So yes, like changing, make things change can be a good way to measure success, and page view, of course, as well.
Well, that is an interesting one, right? Because the Panama Papers is an interesting model, because there's one that was really, you know, when it was first released, I found it on one specific website. A day later, I saw it on Fusion. They also obviously was participating in it, and they had it on their own website. So, you know, that layer of like, it became fractured in terms of my experience, and I didn't, you know, it would be an interesting model to sort of say, is there one singular platform that captures the story, and it's not fractured into multiple distribution models?
Yeah, we did a project called Moving Forward, if you'll just pull up the slide, please, which was an effort to, this was a local project that we did in Metro Vancouver that was about a high-stakes transportation referendum that we were voting on. And most of the coverage that the media outlets that were involved were producing was really tied up in the politics of this, and that was the problem that we identified. It was like all this reporting was about the CEO of our transportation authority's salary and the fights between mayors, but it wasn't actually about the issue itself of how our region was going to transition during a big spike in population over the next 10 years, and how we were going to deal with our transportation system and all the different impacts that had. So when we spoke to our colleagues about that, they said that the reason was because they couldn't access data from the transportation authority that was like famously not transparent or open. So we said, okay, well, we can create a project where we do the heavy lifting of going out and working our sources and pulling out data from PDFs and, you know, creating new data sets and doing all that hard work that can then become an asset for the whole industry. And for this project, we imagined creating things that were high enough value that multiple media outlets in what is a very small media market that compete would be able to all use this, and it would be quite a big collaboration. So we ended up working with 13 different media outlets over the 6-week project. So that was quite a success from our perspective. But what was really interesting about it, to respond to your thing about often the experiences, because we're a platform agnostic publication. We don't have our own platform. Each project we create, you know, we approach and we ask sort of what platforms we need to put together to have the impact that we want. So we just threw up this, as you can see, we put no resources into it. It's just a WordPress site. It's pretty ugly. It doesn't even have our logo on it, where we put all of the data that we were producing, and we put up infographics that people could pull and use in their reporting, and we had a bunch of fancy interactives that the media outlets could just easily embed into their own reporting with an embed code. And we assumed, and the thing about this was, because we had these interactives, we were able to grab the data from all the different media partners that were reporting on this. So we knew who was reading and how they were interacting with the data, from, you know, the major newspaper to the regional newspaper and the radio station and the television station. And amazingly, we had way more traffic on our own crappy WordPress site that was driven through Facebook than through any of our media partners. And that was a real eye-opener for us, because we often thought of that we really needed to be working with through media partnership to get the platforms that we needed. And they were driving traffic back to us, of course, but yeah, we were quite surprised by that. So just to get to, and I think part of it was that we were pulling this whole story together in one place and creating an experience that allowed the user to go through it, and it kind of took off through Facebook and in a way that I didn't expect, and through Reddit, and just took on this life of its own. So yeah, so that was a really neat part of it. Can I say one thing about impact too, and just how we think about the success of our project? So at Discourse Media, we're completely driven by impact, and we think about our impact really intentionally. So when we start a project, we start by asking, okay, what are we trying to do here? What would success look like for us? What are we trying to contribute? And kind of backtrack from there and decide from there. We select which media partners we need to get to reach the audience to have the impact that we want. And with most of our projects, we're super open with our partners about exactly what we're trying to achieve, and we found that's much more successful than the projects where we either fail to or intentionally don't be very open with what we're trying to contribute to public discourse. So the things that we're looking at when we're assessing our success afterwards is we've got sort of four pieces in our framework of assessing our impact. The first one looking at the dialogue that happened around it. So we're trying to produce journalism that can fuel constructive dialogue. So that includes looking at social media and consumption metrics. We analyze that not only for the quantity of dialogue, but also the quality of it, particularly around an issue like race. That's something that we want to make sure we're not just producing tons and tons of really destructive racist commentary. That'll be media reach, things like that platform. Who's talking about it and how? What are they saying about it? So is this getting talked about in politics? Is this getting talked about among influencers? The second category we look at is like actions that happen as a result, that people take as a result of encountering our content. So that's things like with the Maclean's project that I mentioned, community organizers starting some dialogue around that, those sort of things. And then we look for decisions, like the sort of impact that Anne-Lise was talking about. We follow up, we call back we've been calling back all of the justice ministers to ask them, what are you guys doing about this? What are you doing about this? What are you doing about this? And we're gonna keep calling them until they have a good answer for us. So we've gotten a lot of pledges so far, but we're gonna make sure that we stick with that story to see if they actually follow through on it and that there's measurable impact as a result. And then finally, we consider media capacity to be one of the things that we're intentionally trying to do. So working with Maclean's on this project, we would hope that engagement would change the way that they approach Indigenous stories, or the way that they're dealing with data and those kind of things. So we're working with them really specifically to see if we're able to add value in that way.
Building capacity within the media organizations as well as community.
Yeah.
I know I'm not moderating, but for people on the outside, if you guys are totally welcome to come in, there's plenty of seats. In other words, don't be shy. And also, we're hoping to keep this a conversation, so if, I know it feels rude to interrupt, but go ahead and raise your hand if there's something you want to add or contribute or ask a question. Andrew Haig.
So, mostly for Aaron, but this is mostly for... Hello, check 1, 2. This is mostly for Aaron, but since so much of your impact is working through other media organizations, and I don't know what your future model in terms of your own organization is in terms of building a community around the Discourse brand. Do you feel like the traffic you're getting, the impact you're having is rolling up to a community around Discourse that you could somehow turn into something valuable, like members? Do you feel like your name is getting out there, or that it's kind of disappearing behind the brands of other media organizations?
I think our brand is definitely disappearing behind the names of our organizations. I think that's a good observation, and is something that we've been okay with up until now, but we're increasingly not okay with. So I think it will change our model going forward. So we're just sort of working through what that means. But yeah, I think it's clear that Discourse Media does not have like brand recognition outside a pretty small dedicated audience that just really believes in the vision of what we're doing. And what we're looking at in the future is actually the Power Struggle project, which I showed you just a mock-up of. One of the pages that we're designing is going to be the first time that we're hosting this all on our own platform with really strong branding of our own, and also using that as sort of an iteration on what our platform might be, because we see that community engagement piece as being absolutely essential to our method. And there's a way to demonstrate that so that we're communicating to our audience and to our supporters that that's the sort of work that we do, but we're also able to use as an interface for some of the engagement that we want to be doing. So yeah, you'll see us kind of coming. We're 2 years old. We just had our 2nd birthday, so it's been important for us. And we're also, I think it's important to note, we're not, even though we function a lot like a nonprofit news organization, that, you know, some of the examples that we're seeing in the States, we are not that in Canada. We are just a plain old company without a bunch of operational funding, so we've had to do things, really bootstrap it and do it as cheaply as possible, and doing this based on earned revenue from day one. And I won't get into our model too much. We're going to talk about that this afternoon if you're interested. But that's also meant that that collaboration and partnering with media outlets was absolutely essential to us getting started. We just didn't have the resources to do this otherwise, and now we're getting there. We're like building up a lot of opportunity. So yeah. Other questions? Which one? Oh yeah, okay, yeah. Let's, another question for you two then, that I skipped over, is just, what do you view collaborations as being successful? And, you know, I'm an education reporter before I founded Discourse Media, and one of the things that I learned while reporting on new pedagogy practices was that when we talk about like collaboration and teamwork in classrooms, there's like actually a very large, a very broad spectrum of what that can mean and how deep that is, and the value that it produces from, hey, you and I are going to work on a paper together, I'll write this part, you write that part, and if one person fails to do their thing, well, that's fine because the other person's part is in there, to like actual deep collaboration that really involves the whole team depending on each other and bringing something different to it. So Anne-Lise, what do you see as making a collaboration successful, and what sorts of examples have you seen that are deeper, more valuable ones versus some of the more superficial models?
The thing is, like, as you say, like when you start a collaboration, you are facing, so you have the good aspects, and it's true that we haven't talked about the most difficult aspect, like competition between partners, and like they feel into, some media partners can feel danger, and they think it's dangerous for that other media would steal their audience, even if I don't think it's necessarily true, because never happened to me. I don't know if they do it, but it never happened that at one point one media partner invest their marketing team into the investigation and to measure metrics and to define the goals. So like the feeling of competition, I would say it's only human. It's not very factual. So yes, we have to deal with it. It's already happened once to us when what we do is we try to. We have media partners when it's a cross-border investigation. It's like one media per country and with one language. And it happened like at one point, Vice UK wanted to be involved in our consortium. The thing is, like Vice UK, when they publish something, they automatically translate the article into different languages, and they publish in their different countries. And we already had like all the partners for all other countries in Europe, and it led to a big discussion to what should we involve them? Is it dangerous for them, for their audience, to have Vice involved? So yes, as I say, it was again, it's like project management. I have to manage this. It's more communication because it's not factual. It's just only the feelings that I had. So it's a lot of communication, negotiation. At the end, what we negotiated is like, Vice will only publish in English, and it's because we didn't have any English partner. So yes, so collaboration can be difficult sometimes as well.
For me, I've always found that successful collaboration happens. For me, I think my definition of collaboration is really being humble. And what I mean by that is recognizing your strength and also recognizing your faults, right? And the idea of the example I showed earlier in terms of the Detroit Journalism Cooperative, so this cooperative really is a cooperative of multiple 5 media organizations and media outlets, but they had their own strength, right? One was a magazine, one was a television station, one was a radio station, one were community, so it's not, or ethnic media. So the expertise that you bring may not be necessarily a skill set or a media platform, but the expertise you bring could be access to a community that others do not have access to, right? So to me, that recognizing what your strengths are and also your weaknesses is a way to strengthen that collaboration. And those are, to me at least, examples when it works. When it doesn't work is when one stakeholder feels like they can do it all, or does not have the humbling experience to be able to say, yes, you can lead that portion of the efforts.
So the bully kid who always gets an A and just takes over the project, that's what you're saying? Are there other comments, or has anybody done a collaboration that they would be happy to share their experience? There's a comment.
I have a comment on. Is it on? Yeah.
Yeah.
I have a comment on the collaboration. I work in a technology organization, and we've been reflecting a lot on the facts on how. We've heard also a couple of days ago someone saying we don't want to compete on technology, we want to compete on the stories. And I have the feeling that in your experiences of collaboration, this could also work in terms that we collect, and in the Panama Papers, maybe it's a good example of that, or in the migrant files, we collect the data together, and then we compete on how good we are at telling our story in our medium. But at the same time, journalism is competitive. It was born out of, being the first to tell the news. So do you see, and then you're talking also about branding, and you want your brand to become stronger. Aren't we a bit contradicting each other on this? And how do we go beyond the paradigm or the paradox of media being competitive per se in multi-collaboration? So are we sort of stuck in having to find people with different strengths, and that's the limit of collaboration? Or do you have a model that can go beyond and make maybe a competition irrelevant? Just to tell you, we work with open source, for example, and we're wondering a lot if our technology could be shared in a consortium, and what's the governance of that consortium in media organizations. So I know this is not the topic, but maybe in content-wise.
Oh, I think it's absolutely the topic. Thank you for your comment. I'll say a couple things. One of them is that I entirely agree that, particularly at this point in what's happening in the media market, that we need to be looking at what assets do we have that we can share, because as our readership habits have completely fragmented, we're now getting our news from so many different sources rather than the one source. The market is also fragmenting, and we have a lot more smaller players and that kind of thing. So yesterday we heard some examples during the local news session in the afternoon from Josh Stearns, where he was talking about in New Jersey, where there's this, it's a place that has been between really large media outlets, our media market, so it's struggled for that reason. It's always been underserved. They're working on creating networks of local news media that I'm sure do compete, but they also share a lot, and I think we need to be going that way. Like Discourse Media, for example, we couldn't afford to have a libel lawyer and libel insurance on our own, so we've joined a consortium of community newspapers that are together pooling our resources and able to access that. And those are the sorts of ways that we need to think, and I think technology is another one of those pieces. We've figured out some things about how to best distribute and disseminate content and how best to present it. Some of these things, you know, we don't need to reinvent them over and over again at this point. So yeah, why not share those? I'm totally open to that. And then the second thing I would say is that, yeah, the concept of competition on stories and scoop, I think, is like a pretty navel-gazy kind of thing in media at this point. Like, it was much more relevant to the audience when we were selling the evening edition of the newspaper from a, you know, on the ground handing it out. But right now, do our readers really care? I would challenge journalists who are really attached to that idea of like getting it out 2 hours before the next time. I don't think that people outside of our own bubble really recognize that as like adding a lot of value at this point.
Yes, very quickly, because I think we need to finish soon. I think it's totally true that media are competitive, but at the other end now, media are facing a big crisis, and they need to find new model and find new way to collaborate and to find their audience and to find new way to make money. And maybe we have I think we have lead in data journalism project, because data journalism take its roots in like openness and transparency and more in the science way than traditional journalism. So I'm pretty confident that data journalism project will start a new model of investigation, and that it will spread.
One final thought I would share is that the idea of, you know, if we, again, it's this definition of how do we define success. If our definition of success is and we go back to the purpose of journalism, is to, if we're authentic to believing that if we are offering the news and information that to our community so that they can thrive in a democracy, then the idea of competition is minimized, because it's no longer the competition of page views or eyeballs. It's really about how do we create the democracy that we want to live in.
Yeah, I would just agree with that as well, and offer one final example. With the project that we did with Maclean's, where we collaboratively created this data set about racial profiling, that was sort of the first thing. We didn't discuss this in the outset. We didn't discuss whether we were going to make that data open source, which was a big mistake in the way that we started and initiated this partnership. So, but Discourse Media, we always want to make it open source. Everything we do is open source. So when we got down, it was like the day before publishing date, and I was like, oh no, I forgot to deal with this. And I had to ask the editor at Maclean's, and it's a competitive magazine, and it's hard times in Canada. Like, there's a lot of competition. And I said, you know, I want to make the data open source to any other media outlet and open up the interactives. And at first they were like, well, no. Like, and then we kind of got back to what you were saying, like, wait, what is the point of what we're doing here? And once the conversation went there, they immediately got on board. And what's ended up happening is that there's a couple of local media outlets that are running with the story and using that data to continue to report and following up and harassing the police to respond to this. And otherwise that wouldn't have happened, because Maclean's isn't going to do that work. So. Yeah, I mean, I think we were able to get beyond competition because when we reminded ourselves of what we were in it for you know, the big reason that we were in it, to make an impact. I think we have to leave it there. Mm-hmm. Thank you all so much for joining us this morning, and yeah, let's all collaborate. Have a great day.
Thank you.
Thanks, guys.
Data-driven stories. And as we are here to talk about collaborative project, I will briefly introduce to you a project that we did 2 years ago called the Migrant Files. So this project, we started this project in 2013, and we wanted to, with a group of 10 European journalists, we wanted to assess the impact of the wall built between Greece and Turkey. So this wall was built by Greece in order to prevent migrants and refugees to coming into Europe. And the cost of this construction of this wall was 3 million euros, and we wanted to assess the impact of this wall and to spend like that much money, because our guess was that building such a wall would just make the journey more dangerous and will not prevent people to come into Europe, but just lead to more people to die. So to build this database.
Great. Can I ask you one follow-up question? So what was Journalism ++'s role in that? You mentioned when we were speaking earlier that you think if one media outlet had decided to create this database, this data that just didn't exist otherwise, that it might not have worked because there needed to be an organization just sort of outside. Can you just elaborate a little bit on the role that you took in creating that project?
So how we coordinate the project, you mean?
Pardon me?
You mean how we coordinate the project?
Yes.
Yes. So we had the role of project management in this collaboration. So we had this idea of investigation, and then we decided to apply for a grant, a journalism fund. So we contacted other journalists, and we created this consortium. And the thing is that the journalists...
Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us. And assuming that either you weren't at the bar at the hotel last night or you're bolder than the others. So I appreciate you joining us at 9:30 in the morning on Saturday. My name is Erin Miller, and I'm the co-founder and CEO of Discourse Media, which is a small independent newsroom of 8 people in Vancouver, Canada. And we're here today to talk about multi-newsroom collaborations. And I think the Panama Papers has given us an awesome opportunity to demonstrate what we mean by this. And what I really mean is projects that we're able to pursue as journalists that pursue a more ambitious impact or investigation than we would be able to do as a single journalist or a single media outlet. And so we're going to speak today a little bit about that, and we're going to offer a couple examples of the sort of work that we've done in that space, and also broaden the idea of partnership a little bit.
To assess the impact of this wall, we just wanted to answer this simple question: is the number of deaths at the border is higher than before the wall? And we couldn't answer the question because it appears that no one knew and no one kept track on how many people died at the border, so no public body or no NGO had the answer. So together with the consortium of journalists, we created the consortium of migrant files, and we decided to create a database and to collect data. So we used already existing database that was like but not very good database, bad structured, and it was just draft from there to there, and we mostly use information published in the newspaper, and that's why for us collaboration was essential, because we needed to deal with all the different language of the Mediterranean Sea.
A little bit broader than that, to think about not only what can we do if we collaborate between journalists, but what can we do to reallocate expertise and resources when we're collaborating with other assets like communities and experts. So that's my little introduction there, and I'm going to hand it first to Anne-Lise from Journalism ++, who is going to speak a little bit about some amazing work that she's done, and then we'll hear from Andrew Divigal, who can give us a little bit of perspective from now at the University of Oregon. So he's both a participant and an observer of the media industry, so can give us a little bit more perspective and broaden our view about that. So I'll hand it over to Anne-Lise Bouillet.
Yes.
And if we can have the slide up, please. Perfect, thank you. Go ahead, Anne.
You want me to start to present the project?
Yes, please.
Okay. So hello. So yes, I'm a project manager at Journalism ++. So it's an agency for